Welcome back to the channel. Today we're in the garage. It is so hot in this thing. I cannot wait to frame this garage out and put some mini splits in here, insulate it and do all that stuff, because it's going to be hard for me not to just sweat through my shirt today. But anyways, as you can see, we are here at home. We get, my wife and I try to tag team, so we both get a couple days at home every month, and this is my turn, But tomorrow I'll have to go back to Memphis to be at St. Jude and tag my wife out, and she'll come back home. But anyway, since we got the bait wall behind me here, I figured I'd go ahead and do some videos on some ELAZTECH baits, some ELAZTECH topics. And I wanted to do a video on the 4 different bait designs that I use the most on this wall. And really, that was a actual pretty hard thing to do. It was easy for me to come up with the idea, but when I started looking at the wall here, I'm like, gosh, I use all of these different bait designs so often. And so it was really hard for me to curate, a list of 4 that, I use more than others and I feel like are my favorite ELAZTECH baits. But we did it. It may not, this list may change over time, but as of right now, I think that these are pretty solid choices as far as my 4 favorite ELAZTECH bait designs. And a lot of what goes into this list is, and I already see one that I wish I added. In fact, we are gonna add it. We're gonna make it 5 ELAZTECH baits that I like the most. I'm gonna grab one here. All right. So what's really going into this list of top 5 baits is, number 1, how many fish I've caught on these baits, how much confidence I have in them, but also how well the design adapts to the ELAZTECH material. ELAZTECH is very ELAZTECH is very revolutionary. It's soft, has a ton of action, it's buoyant, and it's extremely durable. So it's very different than traditional plastics. And not every bait design, like you can't take every single bait design that you see with traditional plastics and apply it to ELAZTECH and expect it to work great. But in some cases, it works way better. So those are kind of the things that I'm thinking about when I picked these baits off the wall is how many fish I caught on them, how confident I am, and how well the designs work with the ELAZTECH material. All right, so let's get into it. The very first one is actually the very last one I just picked off the wall, and that's gonna be the Turbo Fatties. The Turbo Fatties is a swimming worm that I actually had a hand in designing, so hence the reason why it's part of this list. That's a big reason, is because I helped design this swimming worm to compete with a lot of the different swimming worms on the market. Some of the most popular, like the speed worm and things like that. And really, I wanted a swimming worm that was first and foremost super durable, because going through the, speed worms or whatever other type of swimming worm that you're using with traditional soft plastics can be very frustrating, because they do, you could have a fish just bite the tail and you lose the tail, or just over time casting it, the tails start ripping and you're bringing it through all kinds of vegetation. You go through a lot of different baits. So I thought having an ELAZTECH bait that could, do the same thing, but better, would be a great thing. And so it actually took a while and a lot of different versions of the tail and the body design for us to come up with the end product. And it's an awesome swimming worm. Like, this is an amazing little swimming worm. It's a little bit wider, little fatter body than a regular swimming worm. But I actually like that. And the reason why we made it a little bit wider is to increase the weight and to allow this bait to really cast a long distance. And also, if we just took one of the skinnier designs that you see with other swimming worms, and we applied it to ELAZTECH, it would have too much stretch on the cast and you wouldn't be able to cast it a very long distance. So that's why we ended up bulking it up. We added you know, a certain amount of salt into this. So it's a pretty hefty bait that you can cast a long distance, but the tail is really what separates this. We went through a lot of different iterations of the tail design and we ended up with this one. We tried cut tail designs, which I thought was going to be the deal initially, but those just didn't work with the ELAZTECH material. It didn't have as much of a thump or vibration. It wasn't spitting and sputtering on the surface as much as I wanted. And then we ended up noticing that on baits like the goat toad or the Z-Man goat, we loved those kicking feet that worked really well with ELAZTECH. So here's an example right here. And so essentially we just took the tail off of, you know, one of the kicking feet off of a goat and upsized it and put it on the back of this, and it works excellent. Really great bait for just covering water on grassy lakes. One of my absolute favorites for fishing around grass. So that is one of my favorite designs, and it's not just because I helped design this bait, but just because it is a fish catcher, and I think it's a real big improvement on you know, other baits that are made with traditional soft plastic. The next bait that I think pretty much everybody that's fished this bait will agree is probably the best in the category, and it's kind of the original in this category, is the Finesse TRD. This is the original Ned rig bait, okay? A TRD is a very, you know, unassuming little bait. 2 3/4 inch, you know, presentation. It's more of like a little downsized stick bait, a little turd. You fish it on some type of Ned rig head, you know, Finesse Shrooms jig head, you got the Nedlocks HD, there's a bunch of different jig heads that you can use with this bait. But the Finesse TRD has got to be the ultimate Ned rig offering. And really, it's because of the ELAZTECH material. Again, there's some bait designs that just work so much better with ELAZTECH, and this is definitely one of them, because ELAZTECH is super naturally buoyant. It's going to stick this bait straight up in the water column. You know, when you're working it on the bottom with whatever jig head you're using it with, it's just going to always stick straight up. You know, the tail's always going to stick up. And that's a really big deal when fishing a Ned rig, I think. And also the durability factor. The fact that you can put one of these on a jig head, and usually the jig head is actually going to fail before the bait will fail. You know, if you put a little bit of super glue on the jig head when you put the TRD on there, it's going to be there for forever. Unless you're fishing for barracuda, you occasionally get a barracuda to eat this bait, it's not going to wear out. There's other ELAZTECH baits, just because of how big they are, that you could have a fish like bite the tail, and then when you go to set the hook, you break the tail, right? But with a TRD, usually fish are going to, you know, be choking it down just because it's so small. So it'll last a long time, and a lot of times, you know, I'll just have to change the jig head out because the hook's worn down or something like that. But it's ridiculously durable. But the Finesse TRD, I think, is the best bait in this category of Ned rig baits. I think they just hit the nail on the head with this one. The very next bait is one that I've made a ton of money on. You know, and it's weird because the first time I saw this bait, I didn't think it was all that great. But I started fishing it and really started to notice, and I think it's because it's made of ELAZTECH and the fact that it wants to stick straight up on the bottom when it's resting, that this bait is just phenomenal. It's a fish catching machine, and that is the Palmetto bugs. The Palmetto bugs is a beaver style bait, you know, real wide bodied creature bait. It's got that wide tail on the back. This one's a little bit misshapen, but it's got that wide paddle tail on the back. Doesn't really have any, you know, appendages that make a lot of action. It's just, you know, it's just a very subtle good, you know, crawfish and bluegill imitator for flipping and pitching. And I really initially became aware of how effective this bait is when we were filming Sweetwater years ago. You know, my buddy Joey and I were fishing Sweetwater, and I started, you know, just naturally starting to flip this bait because we're on camera and we're sponsored by Z-Man. So we would primarily start flipping this, and I just expected it to be something where I could catch, you know, some fish here and there, and it wouldn't be like become my favorite flipping bait, but it quickly became my favorite flipping bait. It just flat out gets bit. And I think that the reason for that is that, you know, because of that ELAZTECH buoyancy factor, I think that it just, when you're slowly working it on the bottom, it's very different than a traditional plastic that will tend to sink and just kind of roll on its side. This bait, when it's on the bottom, when it's resting, that tail, you know, you might hop it and it might undulate a little bit, but once it's resting, and this one, the tail's kind of stuck together. That's one of the hardest things about the heat in here. But when it's resting, that tail will stick straight up, and just, you know, that subtle buoyancy action that you get with a bait that's made of ELAZTECH, when it's sitting perfectly still, that bait is still rising, and it still has this real natural subtle action that comes out of it, you know, trying to float up. And I think that that's exactly what's going on with the palmetto bugs. So palmetto bugs, very much my best and most effective flipping bait that I have in my boat. I've made so much money off of it, and have really caught a ton of fish on it. And the next bait that we've got to talk about is another one that, again, the buoyancy factor, you know, when this bait is resting on the bottom, and the fact that the ELAZTECH will make it float up towards the surface and really stand up on the bottom, that's everything when it comes to this technique. And this bait, I think, is the perfect bait in this category, and it is the mag fatties. The mag fatties is just essentially a 7¼ inch worm, straight tail worm design. It's a pretty thick bodied bait design, and it's just great on a Texas rig, a mag shaky head, or any situation where you're throwing a big worm. The mag fatties is just absolutely killer, and because it's buoyant, it just has the right action to get bites, you know, in a lot of different situations. So I think that this is like the perfect bait design within this category. So mag fatties is definitely on the short list of my favorite, you know, ELAZTECH baits. Finally, we've got another bait that the buoyancy factor is not something that is really important with this bait, but the durability and the softness, you know, the softness equates into more action. But the buoyancy or the durability and softness are the key things with this bait. And they just really knocked it out of the park with the design of the tail of this bait and the overall profile of it, and that is the diesel minnows. The diesel minnows is by far my favorite all-around chatterbait trailer, and I also use it on swim jigs a lot. But as far as chatterbait trailers, and I use a lot of chatterbaits, and so I go through a lot of these diesel minnows. But the diesel minnows, the 4-inch version, is like the perfect size, perfect profile for any chatterbait. And I just absolutely love this bait. You put it on there, and because how durable ELAZTECH is, if you put a little bit of super glue on your chatterbait, when you put this bait on, it will stay there all day. And really, you know, again, it's one of those things that sometimes the chatterbait itself will kind of get worn out. You know, the hook might straighten out or something like that. And the diesel minnows is the most durable part of the whole system. But in general, this is such a killer killer ELAZTECH bait to be used as a trailer on the back of a chatterbait, but it's also really good by itself on a jig head or even like a weedless hook like the Chinlock's hook. This one, where is it? The Chinlock's, like this. It's just a really good bait, you know, for that purpose as well. You know, just finesse style swim bait. And also the 5-inch version is one of my favorite all-around search baits. It gets a lot of bites and it gets big bites too. It's like the perfect little swim bait. So anyways, guys, just wanted to run through my 5 favorite ELAZTECH bait designs that, you know, the reasons we've just outlined, they work better with ELAZTECH and they're just absolutely perfect. So let me know what you think about these 5 choices in the comment section below. Do you agree with them? Do you have one that you would have added? I want to know. So thank you guys so much for watching. Make sure you like, share, subscribe. Check out the links in the description below if you want to purchase any of these products. That's a great way to support the channel and the companies that I work with. And other than that, make sure that you trust the process. I'm going to see you out on the water.